Hello guys, welcome back to the quantity surveying workshop and to another video. In today's video we are going to be doing the part 2 for measuring the tonnage of reinforcement used inside of our lintels. So as you all know, our lintel is going to be cast on top of our walls, and in this drawing we have two types of wall thickness: the 225 mm wall thickness and the 150 mm wall thickness, meaning that our lintels would be two sizes. That's the lintel casted on top of the 225 mm walls and the lintel casted upon the 150 mm walls. So in the part 1, when we're measuring for the reinforcement inside the lintels, we catered for the tonnage of the reinforcement used inside of the lintels casted on top the 225 mm walls. While in this video, which is the part 2, we are going to be looking at how to determine the tonnage of reinforcement for the lintels casted on top the 150 mm walls. So without any further ado, let's get right into the video. So first things first, before we start, remember that we are assuming that the kind of lintel used in this drawing or in this project is a chained or continuous lintel. So we're assuming that the lintel goes round the building, unlike the conventional, lintel where you just add overhang to the openings. This type of lintel goes round the building, meaning that it is continuous. So now, to begin our calculation for the reinforcement to our 150 mm lintels, where are the 150 mm walls? As you can see, the 150 mm walls are not too much. So the wall coming down like this and the wall coming down like this is our 150 mm wall. Similarly, the wall coming like this and the wall coming like this is a 150 mm wall. So as you can see when I zoom in, this is the wall here: 150 mm, 150 mm, 150 mm, 150 mm. So to begin our calculation, the first thing now we're going to be doing is we're going to be starting with what? The verticals. So to start with the verticals, we're going to be beginning with this vertical here, from this side down to this side. That's this wall passing like this, right? And remember, in our process for measuring the reinforcement for a continuous lintel, I told you that at point of intersections, the reinforcement has to what? Intersect. So meaning that this straight bar, this reinforcement inside of this lintel must intersect with the one coming like this and this 225 or 230 mm lintel here. So as this one is coming like this, as this one is coming like this, intersecting this vertical wall, and as this one is coming like this, the vertical wall must intersect all of them. So it means that we need to determine the length from this edge down to this edge. So how do we determine the length now? They've given us some dimensions here. From here to here is 1246. From here to here is 230. From here to here is 472. From here to here is 750. And from here to here is 257. So we can add everything together to get the total length of this lintel from this edge down to the external edge. So let's do the math. I'm going to be calling that T1. So the first parameter is 1246. The second parameter is 230. Third parameter is 472. And the fourth parameter is 750. And the last one is 257. When you add everything together, what are we going to be having? I'm going to be having a total of 2,955. So it means that 2,955 is the length of this lintel from here down to this edge. But we're not looking for the length of the lintel, we're looking for the reinforcement inside. And how do we determine the length of the reinforcement inside? by minusing what? Concrete cover from both sides. So we'll now less what? Concrete cover, which is 2 by what? 25, and that will give me what? 50. So when you do the math, you're going to be having a total of 2,905. So 2,905 is the length of the what? Straight bar. But this straight bar is going to have what? Bend. So we have to cater for what? Bend. So we'll add bend. And as you can see, the type of reinforcement used here is also what? Y10. So you know the formula for calculating our bend, which is what? 12D, where D is the diameter of the bar. So the 12D will be multiplying it by 2, because the bend is going to be on the two sides of the what? Or on the two ends of the reinforcement. So our formula now will be what? 2 by 12D. And what is D? D is what? 10 mm. That's Y10. So if we do the math, we're going to have a total of 240 mm. So when you add 240 mm to 2,905 mm, you're going to be having a total of 3,145 millimeters. So 3,145 millimeters is the total length of one reinforcement inside of this lintel, this 150 mm lintel vertically. So I'm going to bring it to this side for easy what? Correlation. $3,145. So I'm going to be using my marker now to demarcate it so that you can see. So this is the one that we've done here. So the next reinforcement we're going to be looking for will be the reinforcement inside this vertical 150 mm lintel from this edge down to this edge. So how do we determine the length of this lintel from this edge down to this edge? As you can see, they've given us the dimension from this edge down to the inside as 1,550. So we're now going to be adding what? 230 mm to give us what? The total length from here down to what? This end. So let's do the math. We're going to be calling that T2. So 1,550 plus 230 is going to give me a total of 1,780. So now 1,780 is the total length of this lintel from here down to what? Here. So we need to determine the length of the reinforcement inside, because that's what we're looking for. So we're now going to less concrete cover, which is 2 by 25, and that will give us what? 50. So when you minus this, you're going to be having a total of what? 1,730. So 1,730 is the length of the straight bar. So we have to cater for what? Bend. So we'll now add bend. So it's 2 by 12 by what? 10. And that will be 240. So when you add these two parameters together, you are going to be having a total of 1,970. So 1,970 is the length of the what? Reinforcement. Inside is the length of the reinforcement inside this vertical 150 mm lintel from here to here. So I'm going to be bringing it to the side for what? Easy correlation. $1,970. So doing this, we've what? Measured for this vertical bar here. So that's basically all our 150 mm lintel. So we'll now add everything together to get the total length of reinforcement that we're going to be needing for our 150 mm lintels vertically. So when you add these two parameters together, 3,145 plus 1,970, you're going to be having a total of what? 5,115 millimeters. So doing this, we've gotten the total length of reinforcement needed for what? All the vertical 150 mm sized lintel. So the next one we're going to be doing now will be for all the horizontals. So where are the horizontal 150 mm lintels in this drawing? You can see from this edge down to this edge is 1, and from this edge down to this edge is 2. Remember that they must intersect with what? The vertical reinforcements. So the horizontal reinforcement must intersect with the vertical reinforcement, meaning that the reinforcement must start from here and end here. Similarly, the reinforcement must start from here and end here, so that there will be an intersection. So the first reinforcement we're going to be looking for will be the reinforcement inside this lintel here. So how do we get the length of this lintel from this point to this point here? They've told us that from this point to the inside of this wall is 1,350, as you can see here. So we'll add what? The thickness of this wall, which is what? 230. So I'm going to be calling that B1. So for B1, we have 1,350 plus what? 230. And that's going to give us a total of what? 1,580. So it means that the length of this lintel from this point here down to this external point here is 1,580. So we need to determine the reinforcement inside of it by lessing what? Concrete cover. So now less concrete cover, which is 2 by what? 25, and that will give us what? 50. So when you minus 50 from 1,580, you are going to be having 1,530. So 1,530 is the length of the what? Straight bar. So we have to cater for what? Bend. So we'll now what? Add bend. So you know the formula, 2 by what? 12D, which is 2 by 12 by 10, and that's going to give you what? 240. So when you add 240 to 1,530, you are going to be having a total of what? Of 1,770. So we'll bring it to the side for easy correlation. 1,770. So it means that we've already done what for this reinforcement here. So let me use my marker to what? Demarcate it. They must intersect, remember, so from here to here. So the next reinforcement we're going to be looking for will be the reinforcement inside this horizontal 150 mm lintel from this edge down to what? This edge. So how do we get the length of this lintel from this point to this point? They told us that end to end from here to here is 2,065. We'll add the thickness of this wall, which is 150 mm, and then we'll add the thickness of this wall here, which is what? 230. So now let's do the math. I'm going to be calling that B2. So 150 mm, which is the thickness of this wall, plus 2,065, which is from the end to end dimension from here to here, then plus 230, which is the thickness of this wall. When you add everything together, we're going to be having a total of what? 2,445. So 2,445 is the length of this lintel from this edge down to this external side. So we'll now less what concrete cover to get the length of the reinforcement inside, which is 2 by what 25, and that's going to give me what 50. So when you do the maths, you're going to be having a total of what 2,395 millimeters. So this is the length of the straight bar inside this lintel here. So we're not going to what scatter for what bend, and the formula is 2 by 12D, which is 2 by 12 by 10, and that will give us 240 mm. So when you add these two parameters together, you are going to be having a total of what 2,635. So 2,635 is the length of the reinforcement that we're going to be needing inside this horizontal lintel here. So I'm bringing to the side for easy what correlation. 2,635. So we're now going to be adding all the what horizontals together. So the first parameter is 1,770, and the second parameter is 2,635. So when we add the two of them together, we're going to be having a total of what 4,405. So this is the total length of reinforcement that we're going to be needing for the horizontal 150 mm what lintels. So we'll add the horizontals and the vertical reinforcements together to get the total length of reinforcement inside the 150 mm lintels. So the total length now will not be what the vertical. We had a sum of what 5,115. So we'll bring it back here. 5,115, then plus the what horizontal, which is 4,405, and we're going to be having a total length of what 9,520 millimeters. So this is the total length of the reinforcements that we're going to be needing to make the straight bars inside of the 150 mm what lintels. So you know that the unit of measuring reinforcement is in tons, so we have to determine the tonnage. So we'll not describe by saying what high tensile steel bars towards lintels, or to 150 mm lintels. So 150 mm lintels, right? So we'll now what book. So we'll convert this 9,520 millimeters to meters, which is what 9.52. Now remember, this is the total length for one reinforcement, and inside the lintel there are going to be how many reinforcements? 4. So we now multiply it by what? 4. So when you do the math, you're going to be having a total of what 38.08 meters. So this will be the total length of your what reinforcement in meters for all the 4 reinforcements that will be inside of both the vertical and horizontal 150 mm lintels. So now we're now going to be converting this 38.08 meters into what? Tons. So to tons, what are we going to be doing? We'll bring out the total length, which is 38.08 meters, and then we'll multiply it by the weight of the what? Reinforcement. So the weight of Y10 reinforcement is what? 0.617 kg. I've told you how to determine the weight of the reinforcement in our previous video. So if you haven't seen that video, please go and check it out. So 0.617 kg per meter. So when you do the math, you're going to be having a total of what? 23.50 kg. So how do we convert this to tons now? By dividing it by 1000. And we're going to be having a total tonnage of what? 0.02 tons. So this is what you'll be carrying to your what? Bill of quantity. So doing this, we've measured for what? The straight bars inside the 150 mm lintels. So the next thing I will not need to cater for will be for the stirrups along that what? Lintel. So the first thing now we're going to be doing now is to determine the length of our what? Stirrups. So how do we determine the length of our stirrups? We have to bring out the caricature section of our what? 150 mm what? Lintels. So as you can see, the reinforcement that we're going to be using as our stirrups inside the 150 mm lintels would be Y8. So look, what you can see here is a caricature section of the lintel. Now you know that the side that will be laid on top of the walls would have the same thickness of the wall. So since it's 150 mm wall, it means that from here to here, as you can see on top, will be 150 mm. While the height of the lintel will be as high as what? The height of a block, so that the course as you are laying the next course of blocks will be what? Uniform. So it has to be the same height as the what? Block, which is 230 mm. So as you can see before, it brought out the what? Dimension. So how do we determine the length of this our reinforcement going around? So now let's start with the shorter side, which is 150. So as you can see, or before we start, you can see what shape do we have here. This is what? A rectangle. So it means that the two opposite sides are what? Equal. So if we determine the length of this reinforcement for the shorter side, we can multiply it by 2 to cater for this side and what? This side. And similarly, the same thing for this side. When we get the length of the longer side, we can multiply it by 2 to cater for this side and what? This side. So how do we determine the length of this reinforcement for the shorter side? They told us that the length of the lintel is, the length for this side of the lintel is 150 mm. So we can now less concrete cover from these two sides here. Whatever we are left with to be the length of this reinforcement inside. So we can now multiply it by 2. And then we can follow the same approach for the what? Longer side. And then multiply it by what? 2. When we add everything together, it will give us the length of this reinforcement inside. Then we can now add our bend. So let's calculate. So for the shorter side, we'll be calling it what? L1. Or let me just say the longer side first. L1. So the longer side now, as you can see in this drawing, is what? 230 mm. So we'll now write 230 mm. We'll now less concrete cover, which is the concrete cover is 25 mm from both sides, which is 2 by 25. That will give me 50 mm. So when you do the math, you're going to be having a total of what? 180 millimeters. So this is the length for one side. We'll multiply it by 2 because opposite sides are what? Equal. And we're going to be having a total of what? 360 millimeters. So we're going to be doing the same thing for the shorter side, calling it L2, and the dimension is what? 150 mm. So we'll now less what? Concrete cover, which is 2 by 25, and that will give me what? 50 mm, right? So when you do the subtraction, you're going to be having a total of what? 100 mm. So you multiply it by 2, and we'll have what? 200 millimeters. So when you add these two parameters together, you are going to be having a total of what? 560 millimeters. Now, this 560 millimeters is the length of the straight bars inside of what? The stirrups, as this straight rectangular bar. So we have to cater for what? The bend. So you know the formula for catering for bend, right? We will now add what? Bend, which is 2 by what? 12D by 8, sorry, since the diameter of the reinforcement is 8 mm. So we're going to be having what? 192. So when you add the two of them together, you're going to be having a total of what? 752 millimeters. So it means that the length of the reinforcements used to make this stirrup here, including the bend, is what? 752 millimeters. Now we now need to determine the number of what? These stirrups that we are going to be having inside of what? Our 150 what? Lintels. So now, like I said before, the placement of the stirrups would be in to in, right? In to in, meaning that there would not be what? Stirrups at the point of what? Intersection. So now if you look at this drawing here, you can see that this is the length. This is how we determine the length of our reinforcement for this vertical side here. The reinforcement is going to span from here down to here for the straight bar. But now I said that the stirrups are not going to be found at the point of what? Intersections. So now since we've determined the length from here to here, what we need to do now is to determine the length or the in-to-in dimensions minus the in-to-in dimensions where there are no what? Intersections. So it means that the stirrups now for this straight vertical 150 mm reinforcement now is going to span from here from this internal point down to this what? Point. Because you see that there's an intersection here, there's also an intersection here. Similarly, for this point, the stirrups is going to span from this point down to this point here internally, because there's an intersection here. Similarly, the same thing applies for this what? Horizontal part of the 150 mm lintel. So you can see there's an intersection here, there's also an intersection here. So we need to determine the length in to in from this point to this point, with the two dots is 1200. So we're going to be doing the same approach for what? This one. So now what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be getting the total length. Yes, the total length or the span at which we're going to be finding our what? Stirrups. So now let's do the math. So the number of stirrups is at what? 200 mm center to center. So now we want to determine the length where we're going to be finding these stirrups. So if you look at this drawing here, we need to determine the in-to-in dimension from this edge of the wall down to this edge of the wall. And they've told us that from here to here is 1246. So what are we going to be doing now to determine the in-to-in dimension from here to here? We'll be minusing what the thickness of this wall, which is what? 230. So 1246 minus 230, we're going to be having what? 1016. So it means that the placement of these stirrups from here to here will be at a span of 1016. So we'll write it down. 1016. Good. So the next one now, we now need to determine the length from this point to this point of what? Intersection. So now how do we do that now? They've told us that from here to here is 472, from here to here is 750, and from here to here is 257. So when you add those three parameters together, 472 plus 750 plus 257, you're going to be having a total of what? 1479. Meaning that from this edge here down to this external side is 1479. But we need to minus this point of intersection here. And this point of intersection is the what? Thickness of this wall, which is what? 150 mm. So minus 150 mm is what? 1329. Meaning that from this internal point here to this internal point here, where the stirrups are going to be positioned, is what? 1329. So we'll write it down. 1329. So the next one now we're going to be looking at will be for this point down towards this point. And as you can see, they've given us the in-to-in dimension here as 1200. So we'll now write it down. 1200. Good. So we'll now move to the next point, which is what? For this point here. So they told us that the in-to-in dimension from here to here is 2065. Remember, I said that stirrups are not going to be found at the point of intersections. So we'll minus the point of intersection here, which is the thickness of this wall, 150 mm, and the thickness of this wall, which is what? 230 mm, and that will give us what? 2065, which would have given us here. So we'll write it down. 2065. So the same thing applies for this here, from this point down to this point. Remember, stirrups will not be found at this point of what? Intersections. So they've told us that the in-to-in dimension from here to here is what? 1400. So we'll write it down. 1400. So now we've gotten all the points where our stirrups would be what? Placed. So this 1, this 2, this 3, this 4, and this what? 5. So we're supposed to have 5 parameters here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we'll add everything together. 1016 plus 1329 plus 1200 plus 2065 plus 1400 will give me a total of what? 7010. So 7010 is the what? Total length at which the stirrups will be what? Placed. So what do we need to do now to get the number of the stirrups that will span this 710 millimeters? They told us that the stirrups now will be laid every 200 mm center to center. So we'll now divide this by what? 200 mm. So 710 minus what? 200 is going to give me a total of what? 35.05, which is what? 35 number. So we'll now add plus 1 for contingencies, which is what? 36 number. So it means that this 752 millimeter length of reinforcement that we'll be using to make the stirrups, we're going to be using them 36 times to span the total length of our what? 150 mm lintels. So with this now, we can now what? Describe and convert it to what? Tons. So we'll describe by saying what? Mild steel bars to lintels of 150 watts mm. So now they told us that we determine the length to be what? 752 mm. So converting it to meters would be what? 0.75 meters. So now how many stirrups now did we calculate? 36 in number, so multiplied by what? 36. So 0.75 times 36 would give me a total of what? 27 what? Millimeters. 27 meters, sorry, 27.00 meters. Right? So this is the total length of reinforcement that we are going to be needing to make 36 number of what? This length of what? Stirrups for the 150 mm what? Lintels. So we'll now convert this to what? Tons. So to tons, we'll bring out this parameter, which is 27 meters, then multiplied by the what? The weight of our what? 8 mm reinforcement, and the weight is 0.395 kg per meter. So in our previous video, I stated the formula you can use to determine the weight of your reinforcement in kg, in case you forget. So if you haven't watched that video, please, I advise you go and watch that video. So when you do the math, you're going to be having a total of what? 11.55 you're going to be having a total of what? 10.67 kg. So to convert it to tons, you divide this by what? 1000. You are going to be having a total of what? 0.01 tons. So doing this, you've measured for the tonnage of your reinforcement inside of the 150 mm lintels, both the straight bars and the what? Stirrups. So with this, we've come to the end of today's video, guys. I'm sure you might be asking yourself how I know all these things, but truth of the matter is that we weren't taught all these things in school. How I learned all these things is by sheer observation of what is going on site, and a mixture of the fundamentals, the fundamentals of measurement that I'm being taught in school. That is why I am always going to be an advocate of quantity surveying students going to the site and observing what is going on site. So please go to the site. It is very important. It might be stressful, but it is very important. So with this, we are going to be concluding this video. Please, if you enjoyed what you saw in this video and you derived adequate knowledge from it, please do not forget to like, share and subscribe to this channel. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next video.